Hi girls, it's Miss Gaska. Today I'm going over English 1 Semester 1 Week 3 Activity 2.8 Irony in the Vaults. Our learning targets for this activity are to identify how irony is conveyed through words, actions, and situations in a story, acquire an understanding of challenging vocabulary by diffusing unknown words, and analyze how an author effectively uses syntax to create a distinct style. So let's review irony. Think about the situational irony in the two short stories by O. Henry and Hecker. The situational irony leads to an understanding of the theme or major idea of the story. What was ironic about the situation in each of those stories? So think back on the stories we just read, The Gift of the Magi and the other one. What was so ironic about those stories? So now let's look at introducing the strategy diffusing. To diffuse a text means to read a passage, note unfamiliar words, and then use context clues, dictionaries, or other resources to discover meaning for the unfamiliar words. So let's look at the side here with our literary terms. Here we have dramatic irony, which occurs when the reader or audience knows more about the circumstances or future events than the characters in the scene. And then we have verbal irony, which occurs when a speaker or narrator says one thing while meaning the opposite. So, preview. In this activity, you're going to be reading a short story and analyzing how the author conveys irony through words, actions, and situations. Let's look at the setting of purpose for reading section. Read the definitions for irony and verbal irony. Okay, we just did that. As you read the story, highlight any examples of irony. Using the diffusing strategy to circle unknown words and phrases, try to determine the meaning of those words by using context clues, word cards, or a dictionary. So, this is one of my favorite stories that Springboard has you read. It's called The Cask of Amontillado by Edgar Allan Poe. Edgar Allan Poe was considered the father of modern suspense, the father of modern horror, and the father of the modern detective story. So when we read this, I want you to think about those types of irony that they were talking about. Let's look at them again really quick. We have dramatic irony. That's when the reader or audience knows something that the main character doesn't know. And verbal irony, which occurs when a speaker or narrator says one thing while meaning the opposite. Another word for verbal irony, by the way, is sarcasm. So when somebody's sarcastic, they're using verbal irony. So let's go down and read the story. Now, usually I only read a bit of the story to you and have you annotate the rest, but this is kind of a difficult story and it's also a lot of fun. So I really want to go through the story with you and discuss the different elements that are at play that really put together irony so that you get a good grasp on what this story is doing in order to create this sense of suspense, this sense of irony, and entertain the reader altogether. So, let's get started. The Cask of Amontillado by Edgar Allan Poe. And just in case you don't remember from our last lesson, Amontillado is a type of wine, and a cask is a huge barrel of the wine. And so Amontillado is particularly expensive, so a cask of it is worth a lot of money. The 1,000 injuries of Fortunato I had borne as I best could, but when he ventured upon insult, I vowed revenge. You, who so well know the nature of my soul, will not suppose, however, that I gave utterance to a threat. At length I would be avenged. This was a point definitely settled, but the very definitiveness with which it was resolved precluded the idea of risk. I must not only punish, but punish with impunity. A wrong is unredressed when retribution overtakes its redresser. It is equally unredressed when the avenger fails to make himself felt as such to him who has done the wrong. So, some of these words are very unique, and we don't see them very often. So let's look for what we may or may not know. We have ventured, which is kind of like adventured. We have utterance, which means something that you speak. And then we have avenged, which over here tells us means punished. It's kind of like revenge, but a little bit different. Think about the Avengers. Definitiveness, you may not know definitiveness, so I'm going to go ahead and circle that. Precluded. Impunity. Unredressed, which is directed over here as not corrected or set right. Retribution, which is another word for revenge. Redresser. So look at how unredressed, redresser. This is related to unredressed. And then it is equally unredressed when the avenger fails to make himself felt as such to him who has done wrong. Okay, so now we see this has a lot of words that we may or may not be familiar with. So another thing that I would do when I'm reading something that has a lot of unfamiliar words or phrases is I'm going to go ahead and point out where all my periods are so I could break it up into smaller chunks. And I'm not going to do this for the entire essay, or I mean the entire story. I'm just doing this to demonstrate to you a way to read something that's a little bit difficult to read and understand. So I'm going to first go through and circle every period that I find. So here are all my periods. Now I'm going to put a slash every time I see a comma. So I'm going to put a slash here. I'm going to put a slash here. Slash here. I'm going to also include the semicolon. And this M dash. So we have a bunch of different pieces. So if I were going to be reading this for clarity, I would try to tackle one piece at a time. So instead of doing that though, let's summarize the paragraph on the side. So he's saying that there is this man, a man named Fortunato, had injured him 1,000 times, but now he's insulting him too. So you guys might have heard the phrase to add insult to injury, which means you've hurt somebody and then you make fun of them afterwards. And it's kind of an expression that's not meant to be taken literally but figuratively. And basically it means that they've insulted you and then they've done something that went beyond insult as well. So then he said he knew he had to take revenge. He says, of course I didn't give utterance to a threat, meaning he didn't threaten him. And he also wanted to make sure that there was no risk of getting caught. So he knew that he had to punish the man, but also be careful about it. And so he also wanted to make sure that the person he punished knew that he was being punished. I'm going to make this font a little bit smaller just because it's overlapping with other part of the story. Or other part of the text here, so it's a little difficult to see. Okay. So, we have this man, and he's trying to get revenge against somebody else. He's going to punish him in some type of way, and he wants the guy to know why he's being punished. He says, revenge fails if the person you're getting revenge against doesn't know that you're getting revenge against them and doesn't know that it's you who did it. It must be understood that neither by word nor deed had I given Fortunato cause to doubt my goodwill. I continued, as was my wont, to smile in his face, and he did not perceive that my smile now was at the thought of his immolation. So I'm going to circle here where he says want, because it's used in an unfamiliar way here, and also immolation down here says killing as a sacrifice. So now we know that he plans on killing Fortunato. So he is still friendly to Fortunato because he doesn't want the man to think that there's anything wrong, and he doesn't realize that the man is smiling at the thought of killing him. So I'm going to also highlight this part because that's a little bit ironic. Because the reader knows now that Fortunato is going to be killed, but Fortunato doesn't know. He thinks that Montresor is smiling at him because they're friends, but in reality, Montresor is smiling at the thought of killing him, which is ironic because that's the opposite of what Fortunato expects. So whenever we see the opposite of what somebody expects, that's going to be a type of irony. He had a weak point, this Fortunato, although in other regards he was a man to be respected and even feared. He prided himself on his connoisseurship in wine. Few Italians have the true virtuoso spirit. For the most part, their enthusiasm was adopted to suit the time and opportunity to practice imposture upon the British and Austrian millionaires. In painting and gimmery, Fortunato, like his countrymen, was a quack. But in the matter of old wines, he was sincere. In this respect, I did not differ from him materially. I was skillful in the Italian vintages myself, and bought largely whenever I could. So we may not know. Connoisseurship is expertise. If you don't know what expertise is, it means he's an expert. Virtuoso. Imposture is deceit or dishonesty. Gimmery is like the study of rare gems like rubies, diamonds, sapphires, things like that. If somebody is a quack, you probably know what that means, but I'm going to circle it anyway. And then I did not differ from him materially. You might not know how materially is used in this case. And then vintages, it's basically a way of saying like an old wine. So this man is basically a connoisseur when it comes to wine. And the narrator is as well. And then for other subjects, the man doesn't really know a whole lot, but he is to be respected when it comes to wine. So Fortunato and the narrator both know a lot about wine and fine old Italian wines in particular. So Fortunato's weak point was his pride when it came to wine. So in some way, our main narrator is going to exploit how Fortunato was weak in his pride when it came to wine. For chunk 1, it says, "It was about dusk, one evening during the supreme madness of the carnival season, that I encountered my friend. He accosted me with excessive warmth, for he had been drinking much. The man wore motley. He had on tight-fitting party-striped dress, and his head was surmounted by the conical cap and bells. I was so pleased to see him that I thought I should never have done wringing his hand." So here it says, accosted, you may not know that word. It has motley, surmounted, but you could probably guess what that one is pretty easily. Wringing. So basically, I'm going to highlight here is that I was so pleased to see him that I thought I should never have done wringing his hands. So he was so excited to see this man that he hates, which is kind of ironic because he hates the man. So we know, the readers know that that's because the main character has something planned for Fortunato. So in the evening of the Carnival season, the narrator comes across Fortunato, who accosted me with excessive warmth, meaning he was super friendly because he had been drinking, who is drunk and friendly. He was dressed in very bright, wild-looking clothes, kind of like a fool. The narrator was pleased to see him and shook his hand excessively. That's what it means by wringing his hand. He's shaking his hand, but he won't stop shaking it, like he's so excited to see him. I said to him, "My dear Fortunato, you are luckily met. How remarkably well you are looking today. But I have received a pipe of what passes for Amontillado, and I have my doubts. So here he's using a lot of irony. He's saying, my dear Fortunato, you are luckily met. So the reason that's ironic takes a little bit of looking at the word Fortunato. The man's name is Fortunato, or Fortune, and then he says lucky. So he's making kind of a joke here. Joke. Fortunato, luckily. And then he's also using irony when he says how remarkably well you are looking today, because he knows that he's about to get ready to kill this man. And then he says, I have received a pipe of what passes for Amontillado, and I have my doubts. And that's kind of ironic because this man already told us that he has just as good of skills as Fortunato when it comes to telling wines apart. So what this paragraph is saying is he greets Fortunato in a friendly way and mentions that he isn't sure whether the Amontillado pipe he received is authentic. So he's saying to Fortunato, look, I have this pipe of Amontillado, but I don't know if it's really Amontillado or not. How? Said he. Amontillado? A pipe? Impossible. And in the middle of the carnival? Because there's a lot of drinking at the carnival, so he's kind of surprised that the man had been able to get his hands on Amontillado. I have my doubts, I replied, and I was silly enough to pay the full Amontillado price without consulting you in the matter. You were not to be found, and I was fearful of losing a bargain. So here he's being ironic again because he's saying, and I was silly enough to pay for the full Amontillado price without consulting you in the matter, which means he is telling Amontillado that, he's telling Fortunato his skills are better than his own, even though he knows they're equal. So that's the opposite of what he really means. So that's why that's irony. So, Amontillado, I have my doubts. Amontillado, and I must satisfy them. Amontillado, as you are engaged, I am on my way to Lucchesi. If anyone has a critical turn, it is he. He will tell me. Lucchesi cannot tell Amontillado from Sherry. So now he's pretending like he isn't going to waste any more of Fortunato's time. He's using reverse psychology on Fortunato. And then here, Fortunato lets his pride get a hold of him when he says Lucchesi cannot tell Amontillado from Sherry. And yet some fools will have it that his taste is a match for your own. So here he's saying that some people think that Lucchesi is as good as telling wines apart as Fortunato. So he's tempting Fortunato into going with him to look at the Amontillado. Without directly asking him to do so. It's kind of like when you hint to somebody that you want something to happen without asking them to do it so that it seems like their own idea. Come, let us go. Whither? You might not know whither. to your vaults. My friend, no, I will not impose upon your good nature. I perceive you have an engagement. Lucchesi. So here, it's ironic because he wants Fortunato to go with him to the vault so he could kill him. But he's pretending like he doesn't. Probably so Fortunato won't become suspicious. I have no engagement, come. My friend, no, it is not the engagement, but the severe cold with which I perceive you are afflicted. The vaults are insufferably damp, they are encrusted with nitre. So here, he says the severe cold with which I perceive you are inflicted, meaning I think you have a cold. But earlier he said, you look so well. So now he's contradicting what he earlier said. So now he is telling Fortunato that he thinks Fortunato is developing a cold and that his vaults will make the cold worse because of how damp they are and how they're encrusted with nitre. Let us go, nevertheless. The cold is merely nothing. Amontillado, you have been imposed upon. And as for Lucchesi, he cannot distinguish sherry from Amontillado. So this is another example of Fortunato's pride. Thus speaking, Fortunato possessed himself of my arm. Putting on a mask of black silk and drawing a roquelaire closely about my person, I suffered him to hurry me about my palazzo. So here, he is putting on a cape and a mask that's black. But that doesn't seem unusual at all because it's in the middle of a party, basically, where everybody dresses up. So, there were no attendants at home. They had absconded to make merry in honor of the time. I had told them that I should not return until the morning, and had given them explicit orders not to stir from the house. These orders were sufficient, I well knew, to ensure their immediate disappearance, one and all, as soon as my back was turned. So this is irony, because he tells his servants, don't leave the house, because he knows that the moment his back turns, they'll all leave. So that's ironic, because that's the opposite of what you would expect. You would expect the servants to do what he asked. So he did that purposefully so that nobody would be home. I took from their sconces 2 flambeaux, which is torches in case you don't remember, and giving one to Fortunato, bowed him through several suites of rooms to the archway that led into the vaults. I passed down a long and winding staircase, requesting him to be cautious as he followed. We came at length to the foot of the descent and stood together on the damp ground of the catacombs of the Montresors. So here, he tells him to be careful, which is kind of ironic because he's going to kill him anyway. So they're going down into the vaults of the catacombs. The gait of my friend was unsteady, and the bells upon his cap jingled as he strode. "The pipe," said he. "It is farther on," said I, "but observe the white webwork which gleams from these cavern walls." He turned toward me and looked into my eyes with 2 filmy orbs that distilled the rheum of intoxication. Basically, Fortunato is drunk. "Nitre?" he asked at length. "Nitre," I replied. "How long have you had that cough?" So that's kind of ironic too, because he hadn't actually been coughing until here. My poor friend found it impossible to reply for many minutes. "It is nothing," he said at last. "Come," I said with decision, "we will go back. Your health is precious. You are rich, respected, admired, beloved. You are happy as once I was. You are a man to be missed. For me it is no matter. We will go back. You will be ill, and I cannot be responsible. Besides, there is Lucchesi." So here, he is using irony because he doesn't actually want Fortunato to go back, but he offers him the opportunity. He's doing this because he knows that Fortunato's pride won't allow him to go back even if he isn't feeling well, because he doesn't want to seem like he isn't dedicated to the art of wine connoisseurship or whatever. Enough, he said. The cough is mere nothing. It will not kill me. I shall not die of a cough. True, true, I replied. And there we have irony too, because he says, I will not die of a cough, and Montresor, the narrator, replies, true, true, meaning he knows that Fortunato is not going to die of a cough, which is kind of funny. True, true, I replied, and indeed, I had no intention of alarming you unnecessarily, but you should use all proper caution. A draught of this Medoc will defend us from the damps, and that's a type of wine too. Here I knocked off the neck of a bottle which I drew from a long row of its fellows that lay upon the mold. Drink, I said, presenting him the wine. He raised it to his lips with a leer. He paused and nodded to me familiarly, while his bells jingled. I drink, he said, to the buried that repose around us. So he's drinking to the dead in the catacombs. And Montresor replies, and I to your long life, which is also ironic. He again took my arm and we proceeded. These vaults, he said, are extensive. The Montresors, I replied, were a great and numerous family. I forget your arms. A huge human foot door in a field azure, the foot crushes a serpent rampant with fangs are embedded in the heel. And the motto, Nemo me impune lacessit. So here, this Latin actually means no one shall insult me with impunity, which, or something along those lines, which is ironic because he's telling Montresor exactly why he's getting ready to kill him, but Montresor doesn't realize because he's too dumb to understand what Montresor is saying. Good, he said. The wine sparkled in his eyes and the bells jingled. My own fancy grew warm with the meadow. We had passed through walls of piled bones with casks and puncheons intermingling into the inmost recesses of the catacombs. I paused again, and this time I made bold to seize Fortunato by an arm above the elbow. The nitre, I said. See, it increases. It hangs like moss upon the vaults. We are below the river's bed. The drops of moisture trickle among the bones. Come. We will go back ere it is too late. Your cough. So here he gives him another opportunity to go back before it's too late, meaning before I kill you. It is nothing, he said. Let us go on, but first another draught of the Medoc. I broke and reached him a flagon of de Grave. He emptied it at a breath. His eyes flashed with a fierce light. He laughed and threw the bottle upwards with a gesticulation I did not understand. That means a gesture. I looked at him in surprise. He repeated the movement, a grotesque one. You do not comprehend? He said. Not I replied. Then you are not of the Brotherhood. How? You are not of the Masons. Yes, yes, I replied. Yes, yes. So the Masons are a religious, I guess a semi-religious brotherhood. You probably should look it up in order to understand it better, because I can't really explain it to you. And then he says, yeah, I'm a Mason. And then you should also know that a Mason is also somebody who lays gravel and brick and things like that in order to build houses and paths and things like that. So it means two different things. You? Impossible. A Mason? A Mason, I replied. A sign, he said. So Fortunato's asking him for a sign that he's a Mason. It is this, I answered, producing from beneath the folds of my roquelaire a trowel. So a trowel is kind of like a little gardening, or a little, not gardening tool. It's a little thing that you use to spread the plaster and things like that when you're building walls. So he means the different kind of Mason, whereas Fortunato meant the Brotherhood. You jest, he exclaimed, recoiling a few paces, but let us proceed to the Amontillado. So this is actually, you'll see why this is ironic by the end of the story, but I'm not going to ruin it. "Be it so," I said, replacing the tool beneath the cloak, and again offering him my arm. He leaned upon it heavily. We continued our route in search of the Amontillado. We passed through a range of low arches, descended, passed on, and descending again, arriving at a deep crypt, in which the foulness of the air caused our flambeau to glow rather than flame. At the most remote end of the crypt, there appeared another less spacious. Its walls had been lined with human remains piled to the vault overhead, in the fashion of the great catacombs of Paris. 3 sides of this interior crypt were still ornamented in this manner. From the 4th, the bones had been thrown down and lay promiscuously upon the earth, forming at one point a mound of some size. Within the wall thus exposed by the displacing of the bones, we perceived a still interior recess, in depth about 4 feet, in width 3, and height 6 or 7. It seemed to have been constructed for no special use in itself, but formed merely the interval between 2 of the colossal supports of the roof of the catacombs, and was backed by one of their circumscribing walls of solid granite. So in order to really paint you a picture, there is this vault, or this hole in the wall that they just found. It's kind of like a hiding spot. So imagine that here's the main wall, and over here is, over here is the other wall. And then inside here, we have like a little hiding spot. And then in this space, we have like all of this, all of this is covered with like skeletons and things like that. All of this is covered with skeletons. And then there's like a pile of bones right here. Like this pile of bones had been knocked over, but behind it was a secret hiding spot. It was in vain that Fortunato, uplifting his dull torch, endeavored to pry into the depths of the recesses. Its termination, the feeble light did not enable us to see. So the flame wasn't bright enough for them to see what was inside that space. "Proceed," I said. "Herein is the Amontillado. As for Lucchesi..." "He is an ignoramus," interrupted my friend, as he stepped unsteadily forward, while I followed immediately at his heels. In an instant he had reached the extremity of the niche, and finding his progress arrested by the rock, stood stupidly bewildered. A moment more I had fettered him to the granite, which fettered means chained. In its surface were 2 iron staples, distant from each other about 2 feet horizontally. From one of these depended a short chain, from the other a padlock. Throwing the links about his waist, it was but the work of a few seconds to secure it. He was much too astounded to resist. Withdrawing the key, I stepped back from the recess. So he basically tricked Fortunato into going into this hole in the wall, and then he chained Fortunato to the ground through some little chains that were there. "Pass your hand, I said, over the wall. You cannot help feeling the nitre. Indeed, it is very damp. Once more, let me implore you to return. No? Then I must positively leave you. But I must first render you all the little attentions in my power." So he says to the man, like, "Oh, do you want to leave? No? Okay, let's stay." So he doesn't even give him a chance to answer. "The Amontillado," ejaculated my friend, not yet recovered from his astonishment. Ejaculated in this sense means like to shout out. "True," I replied, "the Amontillado." As I said these words, I busied myself among the pile of bones of which I'd before spoken. Throwing them aside, I soon uncovered a quantity of building stone and mortar. With these materials and with the aid of my trowel, I began vigorously to wall up the entrance of the niche. So he's basically building a wall where that hole in the wall had been. I had scarcely laid the first tier of my masonry when I discovered that the intoxication of Fortunato had in a great measure worn off, so he's becoming less drunk. The earliest indication I had of this was a low moaning cry from the depth of the recess. It was not the cry of a drunken man. There was then a long and obstinate silence. I laid the second tier and the third and the fourth, and then I heard the furious vibrations of the chain. The noise lasted for several minutes, during which, that I might hearken to it with the more satisfaction, I ceased my labors and sat down upon the bones. When at last the clanking subsided, I resumed the trowel, and finished without interruption the 5th, the 6th, and the 7th tier. The wall was now nearly upon a level with my breast. I again paused, and holding the flambeau over the mason work, threw a few feeble rays upon the figure within. So as he builds this wall, he's taking his light and looking inside the cavern to look at Fortunato. A succession of loud and shrill screams, bursting suddenly from the throat of the chained form, seemed to thrust me violently back. For a brief moment I hesitated, I trembled. Unsheathing my rapier, I began to grope with it about the recess, but the thought of an instant reassured me. I placed my hand upon the solid fabric of the catacombs and felt satisfaction. I reapproached the wall. I replied to the yells of him who clamored. I re-echoed, I aided. I surpassed them in volume and in strength. I did this, and the clamorer grew still. So as the man is yelling, Montresor is yelling back at him, mocking him. It was now midnight, and my task was drawing to a close. I had completed the 8th, the 9th, and the 10th tier. I had finished a portion of the last and the 11th. There remained but a single stone to be fitted and plastered in. I struggled with its weight. I placed it partially in its destined position, but now there came from out the niche a low laugh that erected the hairs upon my head. It was succeeded by a sad voice, which I had difficulty in recognizing that of the noble Fortunato. The voice said, "Ha ha ha! Hee hee, a very good joke indeed, an excellent jest. We will have many a rich laugh about it at the palazzo. Hee hee hee, over our wine, hee hee hee. The Amontillado," I said. Hee hee hee. Yeah, the Amontillado. But is it not getting late? Will not they be awaiting us at the palazzo? The Lady of Fortunato and the rest? Let us be gone. Yes, I said, let us be gone. And here he's using irony because he means like let us die, instead of let us leave. For the love of God, Montresor! Yes, I said, for the love of God. But to these words I hearkened in vain for a reply. I grew impatient. I called aloud, Fortunato! No answer. I called again, Fortunato! No answer still. I thrust a torch through the remaining aperture and let it fall within. There came forth, in return, only a jingling of the bells. My heart grew sick on account of the dampness of the catacombs. So this part's kind of ironic because his heart feels sick, but not because he just murdered somebody, but because of how cold it is and wet it is in the catacombs. I hastened to make an end of my labor. I forced the last stone into its position. I plastered it up. Against the new masonry, I re-erected the old rampart of bones. For the half of a century, no mortal has disturbed them. In pace repiscat, which means rest in peace, or may they rest in peace. So he put the bones in front of the masonry he had built because he didn't want anybody to be able to tell that there was a wall there at all. He wanted people to just, and if anybody saw, he wanted it to just look like it was more bones, in case anybody came by to see if they could find out what happened to Fortunato. So for number 2, it says, reread the last 2 sentences in paragraph 1. Based on this text, what is the narrator's opinion of revenge? What does this reveal about his character? So you'll want to go back to paragraph 1 and look at the last 2 sentences in order to figure out what he thinks about revenge. For number 3, it says, to whom is the narrator telling his story? Support your answer with evidence from the text. So think about who he could be talking to here. And then why you think that. For number 4, how does Poe create suspense leading up to Fortunato's inevitable death? Cite 3 examples from the story. So oftentimes, authors will create suspense by going into detail to slow things down. So you might want to look for areas where he did that as your examples. For number 5, it says, how does the setting of Carnival aid in Fortunato's fate? So think about how, with all the partying and everything going on, how that could have helped what happened to Fortunato happen. For number 6, it says, reread the first paragraph of Chunk 2. How does Poe use irony in this scene? So go back to Chunk 2 and reread the first paragraph. Number 7, what message is the author sending the audience through the imagery of Montresor's coat and arms? What does it symbolize? So when you're reading that part, remember what I talked about and what it meant. For number 8, how does the author use verbal irony to enhance the story's suspense? Locate 2 examples of verbal irony in the story. So that's things that people say that are ironic. So go back and look at those examples, and I provided and pointed out quite a few of them for you to choose from. For number 9, what effect does the chosen point of view have on this story? So think about point of view, first person, third person, things like that. What is the point of view, and how does it give us, or how does it affect the story? For number 10, what is the central theme of the story? So the main message the author is trying to say. How is this theme created? What does the author do to show that theme? Number 11 says, scan the cask of Amontillado and find the examples of irony you highlighted. Make sure you have at least 3 examples of each type of irony. Scan the text if you need additional examples. Record your examples in the graphic organizer. So here is the graphic organizer. So on this side you put what I state, or what is stated, and this side you put what it means. And then here for situational irony, the same thing. What is expected to happen, and then what really happens. And then dramatic irony, what the reader knows and what the character knows. And we gave examples of those as we read through. Check your understanding. Briefly explain why a writer would include irony in his or her story. How might you incorporate situational, dramatic, or verbal irony into your story? And then you could write some notes over here to answer that question. And then in a well-supported paragraph, explain how Poe uses verbal irony in the Cask of Amontillado to emphasize the evil intentions of Montresor. Be sure to create a sentence that introduces your topic, cite textual evidences or textual examples of verbal irony, include commentary sentences that explain the importance or the effect of the irony, and use appropriate parallel structures of multiple ideas within a sentence. And you could do that over here as well. And I believe that is it for this activity. Yep. So that's all I have to give you today. Thank you for watching. I hope that this was informative for you, and if you have any questions remaining, please let me know. Take care.